Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. Today I'm going to talk to you about our UK-based company. We are the pioneers in scalp cooling technology. So scalp cooling is used to prevent or reduce chemotherapy hair loss. So why did we get into scalp cooling? So back in the early 90s, my mother was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. She was only age 34 at the time, and the first question she asked was, will I lose my hair? Now, being young, having 4 young children, I was 10 years old at the time, hair loss was incredibly important to her. So we've spent the last 15 to 20 years developing technology to manage this side effect and really help women around the world. Unfortunately, my mother passed away over 16 years ago, so we're incredibly passionate about what we do as a family business. So the burden of cancer, there won't be one person in this room that hasn't been touched by cancer in some form of way. And we just see it continually increasing. So we estimate that about 14.1 million people will be diagnosed with cancer annually, and over a 60% increase by the year 2030. So over 20 million new cancer diagnoses every single year. So what does chemotherapy-induced hair loss actually mean for a patient? So we do estimate that up to 4 million patients will lose their hair around the world every single year without our device, and that this will only grow in line with the cancer incidence. So I think depression and stress is often used around cancer treatment, but also what the side effects cause for a patient. This depression and stress has actually been linked to as well a weakened immune system. So a weakened immune system can potentially mean poorer prognosis. Loss of self-esteem is very important to a patient. So the ability to continue happily throughout your life, even when you're feeling better, that disease, that prognosis will make you feel worse when you look worse. You also have that constant image reinforced. So even if a patient is feeling well, they go to the shops, they see a reflection in the mirror or the window and constantly reminded about the disease. I think family worries is an important one. So when I was 10 years old, trying to understand what hair loss means and why your mother has lost all her hair. And then privacy. Privacy is also important. So if you want to continue to work, you want to go and do normal social activities, but you can't keep the fact that you're not well private. And then one very scary statistic is that 1 in 12 patients actually refuse chemotherapy because of hair loss. So even if we just look at that patient population, we can really have a positive impact on outcomes. So not just cosmetic or vanity, it really is far more than that. So the science, how does scalp cooling work? So scalp cooling is the only known technique to be used to reduce or prevent chemotherapy-induced hair loss. So what we're doing is cooling the scalp to around 18 degrees Celsius. And what happens is we actually reduce the amount of chemotherapy that gets to the patient's hair follicles or hair cells. What you also see at lower temperatures is a reduction in metabolic rate. So we see less uptake of the chemotherapy. And in addition to that, what we actually then see is a general reduction in the metabolic activity in the localized area of the scalp. So there are many different mechanisms which are used, which are effective with different types of drug regimen. So our product. So we have a single system or a double system. The single system is great for smaller private oncology units. The double system better in infusion centers. We have a very small, compact unit, and that's really important. So size is really minimal in lots of infusion centers. So small and compact refrigeration unit. And this circulates a liquid coolant around the cooling cap, which is worn by the patient. I think what's important to note is we have a single patient use cooling cap. So patients undergo this treatment only at the point of infusion. So each time they have the chemotherapy infusion, they're cooled for 30 minutes before the chemotherapy, during the chemotherapy, and for about 90 minutes afterwards. So an average treatment time will take anywhere from 2.5 hours to 3 hours. One important factor about our system is that minimal nursing supervision is needed. So we want it to be as easy to use to increase adoption in these hospitals. And then we see that the patients are very comfortable throughout the treatment. And again, tolerance and acceptance is really important. The patient can even get up and go to the bathroom if need be. So we have a simple, compact, and efficacious scalp cooling system. So this is the latest in scalp cooling technology. So it's actually our 4th generation of system. And one important differentiator, as I alluded to earlier, is that we have a single patient use cap. So each patient will have their own cooling cap throughout the journey, and this will be considered the consumable in the treatment. And this is a really important differentiator from other companies on the market. And again, you can see it only takes about 2.4 square feet of space on the ground. So our current market, so this is definitely not a new technology. I'm sure some of you will have experience of Dignitana, who are also on the First North NASDAQ exchange. But our technology is incredibly widely used. So we manufacture this and assemble this in Huddersfield, in England, the north of England. We have over 2,500 systems installed worldwide. So we are the leading company of scalp cooling equipment. If you do visit in the UK, over 90% of all our National Health Service use this equipment, the same in the private sector, and we also provide equipment into the home healthcare sector. We've treated over 100,000 patients across the globe. So we distribute in about 25 markets around the world at the moment. Key markets being France, Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden, and also Russia, Brazil, and Australia are relatively new but exciting markets for us. What we're starting to see is a real acceptance in the national or public health systems, and then even a growing willingness to pay among the private insurers in the private sector. And that's really quite exciting for the business. We also see an increased acceptance of this, and it will continue that way as we have more and more quality of life data. And that's really important for patient satisfaction and different goals that different public health systems are setting. In terms of our headline financials, so as I said before, we're not a new company. We had some investment back in around 2003 at about 7.5 million SEK. And then we've sustained our growth ourselves through profits over the years. So in the last couple of years, our revenues are just over 20 million SEK, and we expect this to continue to grow. We are in operating profit with 1.4 million SEK in 2015 and 2.4 million SEK in 2016. Our first quarter to date has been good. We have about 6.9 million SEK revenues. And again, with a great gross margin of about 5.1 million SEK and our operating profit at 1.1 million SEK. So our intention is to raise 30 million SEK in an IPO on First North NASDAQ. Later today, our prospectus should be well published, and you'll be able to have access to that. In terms of the growth and where we're going, the US, that's our biggest opportunity. And I think that's for a number of factors, not only size of market in terms of patient population, but realistically the type of model that is operating in the US. So a privatized market, out-of-pocket or reimbursement. So there's a slightly different understanding of rather than our socialized care in Europe and other parts of the world. So over 1.6 million new cancer cases are in the US alone. And then for our indication, which we've just got clearance for in the US, so after a couple of years multi-center study at the Cleveland Clinic, Memorial Sloan Kettering, and Baylor College of Medicine, we now have clearance in the US for breast cancer specifically. We will work on other solid tumors, but about 252,000 new cases of breast cancer every single year. So the opportunity is huge. So if we look at all indications, so we will work to all indications. In the UK and other parts of the world, we scalp cool with all solid tumor cancers. So we have annual solid tumor cancers of about 1.4 million, of which are eligible for chemotherapy, which is what causes the hair loss, is around 400,000. And then if we look at the high-risk population alone, we're up at over 200,000 patients annually, and this is growing. So our business model in the US, is the largest market and it is our biggest growth opportunity. What we've done is invested in the right infrastructure to support our growth. So we're changing the business model in terms of how the patient pays for it. So as opposed to selling capital equipment, our plans in the future are to charge the patient each time they use the system through the consumable cap. So we have a Paxman hub, which supports all our physician inquiries, nurse inquiries, and patient inquiries, most importantly, as well as the billing and reimbursement of that patient. So that will be all managed centrally through our Paxman hub. We have then third-party logistics and pharmacy who will manage all the logistics of our equipment, but also our cooling caps directly to the patient's home. This is a prescription-led product. And then in addition to that, we have the Paxman nurse educators. So training is really critical. So we've just got 3 or 4 now nursing educators who will be working with our new customer base, providing high-level training to our nursing population. This will really provide a strong infrastructure for our launch in the US, which is coming within the next few weeks. Our patient pricing policy. So this is moving away from our traditional capital equipment model. And what we're actually doing is selling the cooling cap to the patient at around $500 per unit. And then each time that patient uses the equipment, there will be a charge thereafter. So realistically, an average cost to the patient is around $1,500, but it will actually be capped by us at $2,200. So if the patient is metastatic and has to continue treatment, we will cap that at a certain cost. And this shows you an example here of Hair to Stay. This is just one of a number of organizations that are setting up initially to actually help support those that can't afford scalp cooling out of pocket. So one of the most exciting opportunities we have in the USA is our collaboration with US Oncology. So we've been working very hard with US Oncology over the years, including clinical trials with them. But we're now collaborating with them to put equipment into their locations throughout the US. So US Oncology is the largest community-based oncology practice in America, with over 400 locations, with over 1,700 cancer specialists, and actually see over 850,000 patients a year. So this is a huge opportunity for us to work with them and put equipment into their locations. In addition to that, because we've been working for so long on the regulatory approvals, we have some very strong relationships in many different states with some other large providers of chemotherapy treatments. So we've just taken our first orders and we'll be rolling some equipment out into Colorado at the end of May. And then we have plans for the coming months to put more equipment into more locations. If you look at the actual market potential, it is incredibly exciting. So please note these are not forecasts, but they are looking at the market size. So if we take an average of the $1,500 per patient model, and then we start to look at just percentages of the high-risk chemo patients, we can look at 5%, which is around 11,000 patients, and that would be in excess of $16 million per annum. At 10%, nearly $34 million per annum, and then at 25%, over $84 million per annum. So rest of world opportunities. As I said, we're already working in a number of different countries around the world, but what we've been doing for the last 5 years is really focusing on the US market because that's our biggest barrier to entry or cost to entry. So what we will start to do is really push on marketing elsewhere in the world. So as I said, 25 markets currently and about 50% of our revenue to date. We expect a 20 to 25% year-on-year growth in these markets, and that will be through our increased marketing spend on key areas such as Argentina, Mexico, South Africa, and Taiwan, and also regulatory approvals in Japan through the PMDA approval route. We're also very lucky to have an interesting relationship about to start with a very large pharmaceutical company who are going to look at some key global growth markets, which include Chile, Israel, and Mexico. And then for 2018, We'll then start to look at the Chinese market with over 300 million insured patients. So I'd like to say thank you very much and offer the floor for some questions, I believe, with this gentleman. Thank you.
Why do we lose hair if we have cancer and get a therapy?
So chemotherapy is designed to affect both the mitotic and metabolic processes in cancer cells. So that means just sort of rapidly dividing cancer cells, really. So the chemotherapy is targeted, affect those and damage those. Unfortunately, our hair cells or our hair follicles act in exactly the same way as cancer cells. So the chemotherapy cannot differentiate between both. So attacking the hair cells, and then unfortunately our hair falls out very quickly. In fact, between 2 and 3 weeks after our first treatment.
And that is causing problems for all type of cancer, or?
All solid tumor cancers, yeah. So where we're seeing, so breast cancer we see as a main target, mainly female of course, but then gynecological disease, bowel cancer, lung cancer. So prostate cancer in men is very common to see hair loss. So yeah, the population is huge.
And if you are using this method you have, will you get the hair back, or it's just reducing, or?
So most patients will see some hair loss, some hair thinning, but most will able to continue without perhaps wearing a wig or a head cover. You or I might not notice whether or not they've lost any hair. The patient will, of course. But I think you've got to understand what it means for that patient. So, you know, everyone is different. Hair loss is very subjective, but the patient benefit is phenomenal. You know, I'm written to every day by a patient thanking us for what we're doing, and it makes a huge difference to people.
Is the problems most severe for women, or of it is it?
The data is not as strong or available for men, but we do understand men, you know, fear the idea of chemotherapy-induced hair loss just as much as women. So yeah, we really do promote it to both men and women, but we tend to see more women, of course, using it.
How did you get the idea?
So it was developed through my dad. So when my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer, and as I said earlier, that hair loss was incredibly important to her, and she was a beautiful lady, very beautiful curly hair, and she was asking about hair loss prevention, and someone was already doing scalp cooling. So scalp cooling's been around for maybe 50 years, using traditional forms of ice packs, tourniquets, gel packs. So my mum was offered an older type of scalp cooling, and then that's when it didn't work for her. My family's background is refrigeration, so we have about 50 years of making liquids cold, and we took that technology and developed something to help others like my mum.
We have a small company in Sweden called Brain Cool. What's the difference between that company and your Paxman?
So there's Brain Cool, which is a sister company of Dignitana or Dignicap. So both products are offering something very similar in terms of the mechanisms behind how it works, but we have very different product offerings. So similar in technology, yes.
I will ask the public if they have any questions. There's one having a question. Du uttalar frågan och sen så ska översätta den. How do Brexit affect your affairs?
I thought that could be a question. At the moment, there has not been any problems. In fact, we've benefited from some of the improvements in exchange rate. So some of our European customers perhaps buying more. Also, when we're being paid in euros, it helps us. There's uncertainty, of course, but I think, you know, we're a medical device company, we're well regulated. I think there'll be some common harmonization, and we are Great Britain, so I'm quite confident we'll have some good trade deals.
Varsågod.
Yeah, so that's quite an interesting question. We have...
Please repeat the question.
Okay, so some patients who are going through chemotherapy treatment also have something called chemo brain, which is related to a bit of memory loss. So what they think might be the option is that if you're cooling the localized area of the scalp, for example, it may have an implication on the brain. Now, I think there are some people who are going to look at doing some research. Carina van den Herk, who's a very well-known researcher in this area, may look at it. My view is that perhaps we're not looking at cooling the brain with our product, so it may have limited impact. But it is a space that someone's going to look at.
Is that a severe problems?
Chemo brain, I would be wrong to comment totally on that. It's not an area of my expertise. But of course, I'm sure it is a problem for many patients.
Fler frågor?
You can take my business card after.
You are going to be listed on First North here in Sweden. Yes. Why do you turn to Sweden? Why not in Great Britain or
So a couple
London?
of reasons. Our business historically has been owned by Swedish investors. So back in 1999 and over the first few years of our existence, we were invested in by a Swedish VC. Mm-hmm. So we've already got connections in Sweden. So their expertise, I might be good with the market in terms of developing our markets, but their expertise are the shareholders. I've done IPOs and raised money in this way before, so it made common sense to do that. Of course, Dignitana are already on the First North Nasdaq, so there's always it helps when there's a benchmark. And then I think it seems attractive, the First North Nasdaq exchange, as opposed to perhaps our UK small cap market.
This is the biggest market in the whole of Europe. We have in Sweden First North and Aktiedagen and Nordic MTF, multilateral trading facility. Well, in a technical way, how does your product function?
So in terms of a technical, so it's a cooling device at the end of the day. So what we're doing is we're cooling a proprietary liquid coolant down to around -4 degrees Celsius. And what we do is then that is pumped round a very close, snug-fitting cooling cap. And that's worn by the patient, as I said before, for 30 minutes before the chemo, during, and for a period of time after. And that's what then kick-starts the mechanism, so vasoconstriction, metabolism.
No technical problems?
We don't tend to see technical problems, no. So the equipment, as I said, we have 2,500 pieces of equipment in the world, and incredibly well made, relatively simple in design, so easy to service and maintain.
How do you feel as a person after being using this product for 2 hours?
So most patients, if you look at the clinical studies, tolerate it very well and feel comfortable. But also, like any sort of treatment, other people will find it more uncomfortable. But yeah, after that first 10 to 15 minutes, patients will feel okay and be able to tolerate it very well. And you're fine for the rest of the time.
So actually no problems. It's
you may get a mild headache, but it's transient. A slight feeling of dizziness has been reported previously, but very mild cases, so non-severe effects.
You are planning for a gigantic expansion, I think.
Yes.
Describe it.
So we've been working very hard to understand how best to operate in the US market and other markets in the world. So our plan at the moment is to roll out about 250 systems in our first 12 months, which is achievable by our manufacturing capabilities, of course. We have far more capacity than that, and also our potential customer base. So I have a long list of people waiting for our equipment, which is incredibly exciting. Moving away from selling capital equipment and into a privatized market opens up an opportunity. Plus the hard work and effort we put into the clinical data over the last few years has really strengthened what we've got to offer. So there's not really a reason why an institution or a healthcare provider shouldn't offer this when it's improving patients' quality of life.
So, Richard Paxman, warmly welcome to Sweden and the Swedish market.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.